I'm talking about creation, the existence of God. It starts off with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then he created light and day and night. And then he created the land. And then he created the stars. And then he created, he separated land and ocean. And he created the animals and put the animals on that. And finally God created man and woman. Do that. And then on the seventh day he rested. That's all in the first book of Genesis. And the atheists and the non-believers just love to get their hands on that. Because they hear, you are telling me that God created the earth in just 7 days, the whole earth and the whole thing? And Father Barron does this thing on Genesis on YouTube. He does an excellent job. And basically what he's saying is the book of Genesis is not a book of science. The book of Genesis is a theology of our spiritual link. Theology being defined as what we believe as Catholic Christians. The whole book of Genesis is based on, there's so much theology in that. Science itself didn't start till almost 2,000 years after the birth of Christ, when you have modern science. It started with Newton and Aristotle and others, in which they came up with a theory, developed a hypothesis, tested that theory, and then tested it again. In Genesis, you didn't have science. You didn't have the idea of science, but what you had was deep theology. I'll give you some examples. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the sun and the stars, and the land, and things like that. Remember, at that time, the Israels were in Egypt, right? They were all in Egypt at that time, and the Egyptian people had 141 different gods. Have you ever seen that movie, The Prince of Egypt, that animation, The Prince of Egypt? And the part where Moses takes a staff and he turns on the floor and turns into a snake, and then the Pharaoh turns to his Egyptian priests and says, is that all, show us what you got. And then on the screen they flash one after another, after another, after another. The Egyptian gods that are up there, the God of the sun, the God of the moon, the God of the earth, the God of the water, the God of the sea, all of the different gods, and each one, his face looks like a scorpion, or looks like a bronze staff, looks like something like that. Moses and the Israelites were facing that by the Egyptians at that time, and at the same time as they left Egypt and they got outside of Egypt, they had the Babylonians. And the Babylonians had 41 different gods that they believed. So Moses, when he says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, that is theology. In other words, that's what we believe. There is only one God, and he was doing this to tell all the others, there is only one God, only one answer, and that one God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's the God that we're dealing with here. That's one theology. Another theology that comes out of the book of Genesis, that we believe as Catholics and stuff like that, is about, give me a thought here for a second. All of the other gods from the Egyptians and the Babylonians were formed through violence, a violent act. In other words, this god, the Egyptian god, defeated this god, and this god defeated that god, and stuff like that. And that's how they became gods, through their violent act. Yet our God, the God that we believe in, he spoke and the world began. He used words. In the beginning, he said, let there be light, and there was light. He spoke that on. That's an act of peace. That's an act of love. That's an act of a peaceful act that he does. Unlike the other gods that were around at that time, who were very violent and stuff, he did it as an act of love. And if you take a look at that, and then you take it to Jesus, when Jesus came into the earth, how did he come from divinity into the world? He came in as a baby. He came in as a little baby. And it's the most peaceful thing you can think of. It was an act of peace. And when he came into the world, he spoke through parables of the love of God. Peace be with you. Peace be with you. Love me, he told his apostles. Love as I have loved. As I have loved you, you love others. So he brought, and our faith, our theology is a faith of peace and love. We love that. And the third theology from Genesis is that he created man, okay, and woman in his own image, which means essentially that he gave us intelligence and reason. And that was his greatest creation. And how do we know that's his greatest creation? Because if you look in the Psalms, Psalm 8, it says right here, what is man? And when they say man, they're talking about man and woman. What is man that thou dost take through thought of him? And the Son of Man that thou dost care for him? Thou dost make him to rule over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea, whatever passes through these paths of the seas. In other words, he has given us as man and woman the intelligence to be able to do that. And if you think about the way he did it, he asked them to catalog all the animals and all the things that they were doing on that. So the book, the whole point of what I'm trying to make here is that Genesis is a book of theology, not a book of science. And it's a big book of theology and science. Now to the existence of God. You probably all know the story of Moses when he was watching his father-in-law's Jethro's sheep. And he was watching the sheep, and he was wandering up, and he came up to the mountain, and he saw the fiery bush. And the bush was not being consumed at all. It was on fire, but it was not being consumed by anything. So he walked up to it, and a voice comes out to him and says, Moses, Moses, you're about to walk on hollow ground. Take off your sandals. So he took off his sandals, and he walks over it, and the bush continues to talk to him. And he says, I am asking you to go back and to free the Israelites from the Egyptians. I want you to go back and free them from the Egyptians. And Moses says, no, I'm paraphrasing. Not me. I'm not made up for that job. He says, no, I really want you to do it. So he convinces Moses that he is to do that he is to do it. But before he goes, he says, who shall I tell the Israelites, the people that I'm going to tell to escape, who should I tell him sent me in the first place? Who should I tell him? He's looking for an answer like Thor or the Egyptian god, some answer like that, so he can say, oh yeah, he sent me. But what does he get for an answer? The answer he gets is, I am who I am. I am who I am is what God tells Moses. Now that's kind of like a no answer. I am who I am. How is that going to help Moses going back to do anything? But hold on to that thought, because a little later on, how many go to St. Thomas Aquinas here? Well, there was a young priest named St. Thomas Aquinas who the Pope gave him a challenge. And his challenge was, I would like you to write a thesis about the existence of God. Okay? And he came up with 5 different theories. But one of those is what's called the contingency theory. The contingency theory is based on the fact that things come into being and things go out of being. Things are made, humans are born, and humans die. It's called the contingency theory. And Father Barron does an excellent thing like that. He says, consider the summer cloud. Okay, the summer cloud, if you stare at it, you probably have done if you stare at it, you see it, it comes into existence, and then after a while, it disappears. It goes away. But then he asks, how did that come into being? Well, it came into being through warm particles, through moisture, through things, and that caused that to come into being, and it disappeared. But still, how was that formed? Well, it was formed by crystals. Where did those moisture particles, atmospheric pressure? They says, where does that come from? Oh, well, that comes from the jet stream that circles the earth, and it pushes those in that direction. But the jet stream comes into existence and goes out of existence. It's formed, and then it's not formed. So then you take a look, well, okay, it's not the jet stream, then let's say it's circling around the world, the Earth. It's the Earth circling. Well, the Earth came into existence 5 million years ago, and it's going to go out of existence at some point. You say, well, the circling of the Earth has to do with the universe. And you say, well, the universe came into existence 15 billion years ago, and it's going to go out of existence at a certain time. Do that. And the whole point being is you see how these things come into existence and go out of existence, into existence and out of existence. So at some point, St. Thomas argues that there has to be a point in time where something comes into existence without having something to cause it to. It comes into existence. What that is God. That is what we believe is our God. The thing that comes, it starts it. The whole process of this in and out of being is God to do that, okay? And now, if you go back, you think about that, what a mystery that is. And you go back and you think about what Moses heard for an answer. I am who I am. Well, maybe that's not such a bad answer, because when you think about it, all of these different things leading back to this thing which is God, which is a mystery to us. He's a mystery, but he exists because we know he exists because of Jesus Christ and all the things that he's done. But if you think you can explain who God is, if you think you know who he is, Father Barron and the other people will tell you basically that you're probably wrong, because it is such a mystery. God in our lives is a mystery. Yeah, so how do we know God exists then? Well, now you have to go and look at Exodus 33, in the book of Exodus. And in Exodus 33, there's the scene now where Moses is now up on the mountain again, and God has come, and he's talking to him, and he says, God, you've got to help me. You've got to show me your glory. I need to see your glory so that I can go back and tell the people, show me your glory. And God says, nobody can see my face unless you die. You'll see my glory. When you die, you'll be able to see my face. But up until that time, you can't see my glory. But, he says, I will show you my backside. Now remember, I'm talking about this is theology, what we believe. And he says, I'll show you my backside. So Moses goes into the cleft of the rock, and he's in the cleft of the rock, and God goes by, but Moses is only allowed to see his backside, a tiny sliver, the backside of his whole glory that goes through that. Now what does that mean? That means we also get to experience his backside when we look at flowers, when we look at the sun, when we look at the beauty that he has created here on this earth, when we look at the Grand Canyon, when we go surfing, when we do all the different things, what we're really looking at is a little glimpse of his backside. We're never going to know the whole of what God has created, but we will get to know his backside, who's doing it. Remember I said we are his most gifted creation? Man is his most gifted creation. Why? Because we were made in his image. And what does that give us? That gives us intelligence and reason. So you take a look at the botanist, right? The person who is the botanist, who studies plants. That botanist can study and pass down study and learn from these things, and they can take a plant from a seed and it can start to grow and develop and things like that, and they can learn about photosynthesis, and they can learn about all these things because God has given them the intelligence to learn that, but they're never going to know the whole secret. You take the astronomer. The astronomer, he can look at the stars, and he can see the stars, and they're always looking at something new and discovering something. God is allowing them to see his backside because they're always discovering new galaxies or new things like that. So it'll be an experience, but because we have the intelligence to do that, because God has given us the intelligence to do that, we can study these different things. We are able to see his backside. You see the theology? We're able to witness his backside, but we can't see his full glory. We won't see his full glory until we die. But there's enough proof out there to see that we can develop that faith in God, that strong faith in God. final thing is this. Let's go back to Genesis, to Adam and Eve. And you look at Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve are in the garden, and they are in total harmony with God in the beginning. They're just around him, they love him, they're in existence with him, and their relationship is incredibly close to him. Yet, the first thing that happens is the temptation. In other words, they're tempted by the apple, okay, to do that. And theologically speaking, what's that saying is we are now, as humans, trying to be like God. By taking that apple and doing that thing, we are trying to reach out and grasp him and control him and use him for what we want him for, not for the good of what is good for us. By reaching for that apple that he did, we're trying to be like God. So we can do things start to control our lives, like money, like a car, like a new boyfriend or girlfriend that's taking you away. That person, that's becoming your God, and you're taking away from that relationship that you want to have, that personal relationship that you need to have with God. What's the other thing that happens? You take a look when they had the temptation and God came into the garden. What happens then? After that, they hide from God. They both go and they hide from God. And that's the other thing that can happen to you. Not just grasping to become God, but by not having that relationship, now you want to hide from him. You don't want to go to church. You don't want to do the things you need to do. You don't want to study your faith. You don't want to learn about your faith. You don't want to find out about these things. And more importantly, you don't want to spend the time to develop that relationship with Jesus as your God, as your Savior, so that it affects and consumes your life. Just like it was in the very beginning with Adam and Eve, where they had a great relationship. Now that relationship gets broken because you're reaching to become like God, or you're hiding from him. So those are the theologies that you're having in that evening. By developing that relationship with God and understanding that relationship that you have with God, then it's going to fill a lot of the voids that you have in your life, a lot of the things that you can do. So that's my presentation. Thank you.